Hello and welcome to HPA Global Insights, where we'll be interviewing experts from the dietary, supplement, nutritional ingredient, and overall natural health food industry. Please like, subscribe, turn on that little notification bell, and comment below. Now on with the show. Hi, welcome to HPA Global Insights. I'm your host, Jeff Crowther, the Executive Director of HPA-China. I just recently got back from Natural Products Expo West in Anaheim, California, where the association held a 2-hour event on China's dietary supplement industry. And today I'd like to introduce Mr. Brian Negley, one of the speakers from that event. He is the U.S. Advisor for Early Data, and today he's going to give us a deep dive on how they collect data in China's cross-border e-commerce sector, and showing you how who's the best, who's the worst, what's things sell, all this great data. So let's welcome Brian.
Well, hi, Jeff. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation and for having me here. And for all the participants out there in Expo West, hi, my name is, as Jeff mentioned, my name is Brian Negley. I'm with Early Data, and I'm very happy to be here. And I hope you'll find what I have to say of interest and relevance to you and your business in China. So I wanted to use our data, our e-commerce data on the health supplements category, and review the year 2021 and talk about some of the general trends and some of the findings that we saw in the past year. So I'm going to go ahead and kick off now. First, just to set the stage in terms of what we do in terms of the health supplements category, give some definitions so we all can kind of level set on what we're looking at. So we define health supplements as a combination of nutritional health products and mother-child nutritional health. So of those two, nutritional health is probably 95% of those two combined. We cover all of the Alibaba platforms, Taobao, Tmall, Hong Kong. Also, Kala, as I'm sure you're aware, is also an Alibaba platform. Jingdong Worldwide, VIP, Pinduoduo, Suning, and Amazon. We estimate that those platforms combined are roughly about 80% of Chinese e-commerce sales. So we don't cover all of the platforms in Chinese e-commerce, but we cover the major ones. So again, we estimate that we cover about 85% of Chinese e-commerce sales. We report once a month, so every calendar month we'll come up with an updated figure for the categories that we have. So I'll be showing you some annual figures, and then along with that, some monthly figures. And just to bit more detail on how we estimate sales, because we're often asked this, we use the 30-day rolling sales figures from the Alibaba sites, and then we use statistical estimates to estimate sales on the non-Alibaba sites. Okay, so let's dig in. So I'll be talking a lot about 2021 and growth rates versus the previous year, or 2020. So this first slide is looking at the total category health supplements as I defined it on that first slide, in terms of overall sales and sales growth. So on the left, the bars in blue show the category sales in billions of renminbi. So in the recent year, we measured 75.4 billion sales in health supplements, which represented a 21.3% growth over 2020. That is approximately 11.4 billion in US, just to do the math. The red bars on the right represent volume or unit sales. So we also measure units. So we measured a similar growth rate, about 21.1%, 2021 over 2020. A little bit over 500 million unit sales. So pretty healthy growth. When we walk through the year and we try to get an idea of how that annual figures breaks out in terms of month by month sales, this is value sales by month, and the number's a little bit small, but this is in billions of renminbi per month. So January, for example, was 4.2 billion, then 3.8, 5.7 in March, So this is how the year 2021 looked. So as we all know, there's big promotional months in China. 11/11 is the big promotion. So as you can see, in the month of November, sales were about twice as average. They came a little bit under 12 billion renminbi in terms of sales, about twice the average of monthly sales. And then June, the Liao Yao Ba 618 promotion is the second biggest month, and that comes in at about 1.5 average sales. So this is how the month looks. And then another thing that we did is we took both 2020 and 2021 and we created seasonality indexes. So what this slide is showing is in each calendar month of 2020 and 2021, we just combined these 2 years. We want to understand what percent of sales happened in each month. Okay, so there's no surprise, as we just saw on the last slide, June and November are the biggest months. In November, a little over 15% of the sales happened, 15.6, and in June, 11.6% of the annual sales happened, which means in those promotional months of November and June, you'll get about 27% of the overall annual sales. So those 2 months are very key. They account for over a quarter of sales. Another interesting phenomena is in the last 5 months of the year, about half of the sales happen. So as you can see, once you kind of hit August and September and October, sales increase as a prelude up to 11/11. And then even in December, they stay strong, probably in part because of the 12/12 promotion. On the other hand, January and February are relatively low. That's probably because it's Chinese New Year, things slow down, and they're also post 11/11 and 12/12 promotions. So those January and February months only account for about a little bit over 5% of sales each. Okay, so that's how seasonality looks in the category. Okay, now we'll get into specific platforms and things like that. What we're showing here is the category share or the category importance by platform. Okay, so how much business does each platform do? So Tmall domestic is the biggest platform. I know the number is a little bit small, but that Tmall does about 27% of value sales. Tmall Hong Kong is the second at a little bit over 18%, followed by Jingdong at a little bit over 18%. JD Worldwide is the number 3 player, etc. So this just gives you an idea of the breakdown of sales by platform. So long story short, Tmall and JD combined dominate. They're well over 75%, especially if you throw Kala into Alibaba, you're getting 75, 80% of sales held by value sales. If we look at the same chart on a volume basis, it's fairly similar, but there's one big difference, and that is the number 2 player is Pinduoduo. Okay, so Tmall again is number 1. Now, Tmall is also bigger on a volume basis than a value basis because they sell relatively on lower priced items. But again, the big difference is Pinduoduo. Okay, again, if you go back really quickly, Pinduoduo only accounted for about a little over 4% of value sales, but on a volume basis, they're over 17%. So they're really important on a volume basis. And the reason they're so high on volume and low on value is they sell a lot of lower priced items. We'll get into more detail on that in a later slide. But as you can see, on a volume basis, Pinduoduo is really important. Followed again by the same players we saw last time: JD, Tmall Hong Kong, Taobao, and JD Worldwide. Okay. Now we're going to look at growth. So as I mentioned, we're going to look at a lot of 2021 versus 2020 comparisons. So as I mentioned in one of the slides before, the whole category grew on a value basis 21.3% for the year. But if you look at by platform, you'll see vast differences in terms of how each platform performed. Pinduoduo on a value basis outgrew everybody else. So again, on a value basis, it's relatively small, but it grew 50%, 51.1 to be precise. VIP was number 2 in terms of growth, 34.4%. So interestingly, even though those are smaller platforms, they outgrew the bigger platforms. And then JD was also relatively big on a value basis, 28.6%, outgrowing the total category and outgrowing their big rival Tmall, which is only 22.2%. Okay, so that's sales on a value basis. On a volume basis, it's a similar story. Again, the overall growth rate is a little over 20% for volume. VIP and Pinduoduo again grow the fastest. JD's grows fast again. It's similar on a value basis. Interestingly, Tmall Hong Kong declined on a volume basis. They grew on a value basis, but they declined on a volume basis, meaning they're selling less volume of higher priced items as compared to last year. And you'll see a lot of international players, they lost volumes in 2021 on Tmall Hong Kong, and that's their big entry into the market. And then Taobao underperformed the market on a volume basis as well. Okay, now I'm going to look at manufacturers, particularly the top 10 manufacturers, to see how they did both on a value and a volume growth rate. Okay, so Biostime, which is primarily the Swiss brand, is the market leader. And as you can see, and I know the numbers are small, but on a value basis, they slightly overperformed the category at 23% growth, and on a volume basis, they underperformed at 17%, but they're more or less in line with the category. So share-wise, they probably more or less held their share. ByHealth underperformed. Okay, they're the number 2 player, but they only grew 7% on a value, 4.6% on a volume basis. So they underperformed by quite a bit on both measures. So who grew in the top 10? Interestingly, local players. Tongren Tang grew a lot, as you can see, 50% on a value basis, well over 100% on a volume basis. Renhe, which is the second from the bottom, they also grew a lot, both on a value and a volume basis, close to triple digits. And then All Nature Pharmacy also outgrew the category. But the big winners, Tongren Tang, Renhe. And the interesting thing is this is a category that's dominated by multinationals. Multinationals, particularly going through cross-border. But this year you see a big turnaround. You see more growth in the domestic platforms, Tmall and particularly JD, number 1. And then 2, you see local players outgrowing or outperforming the bigger multinational players. So it's a turnaround in 2021 on both fronts. Okay, we'll look at how the top 10 performed on the bigger platforms, which are the Tmall Hong Kong, JD, and JD Worldwide, the 2 platforms for the big giants. And again, you can kind of see what I just spoke about. If you look at Tmall, Renhe, Tongren Tang did very well. Okay, if you go down to Jingdong, Tongren Tang, another big growth rate. Tmall Hong Kong, interestingly, even though ByHealth lost share, they actually gained on Tmall Hong Kong. So they did poorly on the domestic platforms, particularly on JD, but they actually grew on Tmall Hong Kong, and they also grew on JD Worldwide. So it was kind of a turnaround for ByHealth, but overall they lost share just because they really underperformed on the domestic platforms. Okay, so that's one way to slice it by manufacturer. Now I'm going to look at the whole category, but I'm going to look at which ingredients, which ingredients grew the most, or products with which kind of ingredients. Okay, and for anybody that's followed the category, it's probably no surprise, but probiotics has been growing for some time, and in 2021 that stayed true. So as you can see, items with probiotics grew on a value basis 50%, so that's more than double the category growth rate of a little bit over 20%. And that was true on both a value and a volume basis. So the clear winners were the items with probiotics. Okay, second to that would be multivitamin products. Okay, they outgrew the category, 28% value, 38% volume. So again, the category growth is about 21. So multivitamins did well as well. Anything with protein in it in the top 10 seemed to decline. Protein powder, the leading segment, as you can see, declined on a value basis and just slightly grew on a volume basis, so well under the category. And then family protein powders, sports protein powders, they also underperformed the category. So again, probiotics, particularly in multivitamins, grew, and then the protein, anything protein related, declined. Which platforms grew for probiotics was the next thing that we looked at. So again, if we look at all platforms, they grew 50% for probiotics, more than double the category growth rate of 21%. And not surprisingly, it was the same platforms that grew on an overall basis that grew for probiotics, particularly Pinduoduo, VIP, although here VIP does extremely well, 172% increase in probiotic products. Pinduoduo almost a doubling, not bad at all, at 98%. And then the Jingdong platforms did quite well, as you can see. JD grew a lot in probiotics at 184%, and JD worldwide at 77%. Tmall and Tmall Hong Kong, even though they grew, they underperformed the category here. So they actually lost ground in terms of sales of probiotics. Okay. So again, looking at manufacturers that grow in the probiotics section. So we're still looking at probiotics, and we're looking at which manufacturers grew the most. So a lot of these growth rates are positive because overall probiotics grew by over 50%. But there were some big clear winners, and not surprisingly, that the winners on an overall basis were the winners here in probiotics as well. So Tong and Tang grew a ton here, 633%. So they had a really small base and they just grew a lot. Renhe grew a lot, 265%. So, big multiples of 2021 over what they did in 2020. Wonder Lab grew a lot, 400%. Biostime, the market leader, this is one area they did well. To remind you, they grew more or less at the same rate as the category, but this is one area they outperformed, and it was in probiotics. They grew about 3 times the overall market growth rate. And then looking at Tong and Tang in particular to see how they grew. I know the yellow line is hard to see, but we wanted to take a look and see how they grew through the year. So on the far left is January 2021, followed by February 2021. So at that point, they were just doing a little bit over $1 million RMB sales in probiotics, 1.4 million, 1.7 million. And you can see from about May or June, it really picks up. It goes from a little bit like 2 million some odd in May. They get over 5 million in June, and all the way from June all the way up to the 11/11 promotion, their probiotic products just grew, and they peaked in November at 24 million. So this just shows you how they grew their probiotic sales. Really small base, didn't have much, but they just grew throughout the year, and they had a strong finish in December at over 17 million. So they grew 10x in probiotic sales through 2021. Renhe was starting from a much bigger base. So unlike Tong and Tang, who just had like 1 million or 2 million in sales as a base, Renhe was starting from a base of 10, 12, 14 million at the beginning of the year. So they had a pretty good probiotic profile coming into the year, but they too grew through the year. As you can see, this chart goes up. They almost hit 20 million in June with the 618 promotion. They dip a little bit, but the last 2 months of the year, they go over 20 million sales in probiotics. So they pretty much doubled their sales throughout the year. Much bigger base than Tong and Tang, but they had a very healthy increase as well throughout the year. Okay, now we're going to slice the category a different way. We looked at top manufacturers, top ingredients. Now we're going to look at which price bands are driving the category, what price bands do the most business, and then how do they grow. So we're going to look at products that are priced from 0 to 100, 100 to 200, 200 to 500, etc. The share is what percent share of the market do they have, both on a value and a volume basis, and what was the growth rate of those price bands versus the previous year. So I'll just walk you through an example to try to make this clear. So for example, price bands, products priced from 0 to 100, on a value basis, they had about 18% of the market, and they grew about 19%. On a volume basis, they account for over half the market, which is not a surprise. Low price, but a lot of people like to buy them. So they accounted for 56% of the market, and they grew 29.3%, which is over the market growth rate. So low price products grew on a volume basis, and we'll get more clarity on where that happened in just a minute. Interestingly, the price bands that grew the most were the high price bands. Okay, they occupy a relatively low percentage of the market. So 500 to 1,000 grew over 70%, both on a value and a volume basis. They only account for about 3% of the volume. Not many people are buying products in those, but they account for about 13% of the volume. But both of those numbers were significantly bigger than the prior year. And even products priced 1,000 plus, very small percent of the market, less than 1%, but they still account for almost 10%, 8.7 to be specific, of value sales. And both those numbers, as you can see, are over 30%. So even though relatively small, highest priced items grew. Now we're going to look at the same thing for probiotics to see if we see a similar pattern. And the short answer is yes. Probiotic products that were priced between 500 and 1,000 grew the fastest. Again, they're relatively small in terms of percent of the market. They only have 2% of the volume, as you can see, but they accounted for almost 11% of the value. But as you can see, they grew well over 100%, close to 150%, 147 on a volume, 146 on a value basis. Also, the lower priced items slightly outgrew the market. So to remind you, probiotics as a whole grew about 50%. And as you can see, probiotics priced between 0 and 100 grew slightly over 50%, both on a volume and a value basis. So low priced products doing reasonably well. So it's the stuff in the middle, 100 to 500, both on an overall basis and particularly for probiotics products that grew relatively slow. Okay. One final chart is I wanted to look at the average prices for the total market and then by platform, because we've talked about some of the differences in pricing, particularly Pinduoduo, but I wanted to look at how each platform prices and if there were any changes year on year. Okay, so this is the average price per platform of a product 2021 versus 2020. So if we look at the far left, we'll see the total market, and we see the average price was 139 both in 2021 and 2020. So really not much change, and that's your average, that's your benchmark for the whole market. Okay, so we talked before about Pinduoduo being relatively low price, and indeed they are. They're less than 25% of the market price. So slight uptick in 2021 with an average price of 32. Last year was 31, but they are a fraction of the market, as you can see, well below 25%. So Pinduoduo is unique in terms of both the product range and relative pricing. Tmall as well is well below. There's a pretty big difference between Tmall and Jingdong, as you can see. Tmall price is below the market. Coming at slightly above 100, and they had a slight decline in 2021. And JD is above the market. They also had a decline 2020 to 2021, but they're well above the market. The other thing to point out here is the pricing cross-border. Not surprisingly, because the product mixes differently, it lends itself more toward international players who tend to have higher priced products, higher profile. High price products, let's just say. So pricing above market for Tmall, Hong Kong, Jingdong Worldwide, and Kaola, point number one. And then point number two, you can see there were increases all around. And that could be straight price increases, or it could be a change in product mix. So it's probably in the cases of all three platforms, a combination thereof. Okay, so I will summarize what I've just spoken about and draw some conclusions for you to take away. Okay, one is just overall growth. Overall growth was about 21%, both on a sales value and a sales volume basis. So relatively good, relatively strong, higher than GDP, and that's a good growth rate compared to a lot of the other FMCG categories that we measure in e-commerce. All right, it was the smaller platforms that drove growth. Pinduoduo and VIP, both relatively small, holding less than 10% share, outgrew the larger, more established ones. Also, in previous years, we'd seen a lot of push by cross-border platforms, particularly Tmall, Hong Kong, and Jingdong Worldwide. This year, we have a reversal of that. Tmall actually outgrew Tmall Hong Kong. Jingdong actually outgrew JD worldwide. So this particular year, the domestic platforms outgrew their cross-border counterparts. Okay. In terms of seasonality, no surprise, November and June account for more sales than the rest of the market. Those 2 months account for about 27% of sales. Okay, so that gives you a sense of how the weighting goes. The other thing is the back half of the year, those last 5 months of the year, account for about half the sales, whereas the first 7 months of the year account for the other half of the sales. Particularly the Chinese New Year's months, January, February are the slowest months, each accounting for only about 5% of sales. In terms of manufacturers, the market leader's Biostime, they grew more or less at the market, slightly better on a value basis from memory and below on a volume basis. The number 2 player, By Health, they grew, but they lost share. They grew much less than the market benchmarks of 21%. Interestingly, multinationals have been the big growers in years past, but this year that was not true. Local players were much stronger, at least in the top 10, as evidenced by the growth that we saw in Tongren and Tang, and then her, both on an overall basis and then particularly in probiotics. Speaking of probiotics, in terms of ingredients, probiotic products far outgrew the market with growth rates over 50%, both on a value and a volume basis. Again, overall market was 21%. So probiotic products grew twice as fast as the overall market. In terms of which platforms drove that, pretty much what we saw for the overall market. VIP and Pinduoduo grew very fast with probiotics products. Jingdong also did very well with probiotics products, growing faster than the market. And manufacturers, Tongren and Tang, Wonderlab, Biostime, all outgrew that 50% benchmarking with their probiotics products. Okay, and the last thing we looked at was price points, which price points grew the fastest. And interestingly, it was the higher priced products that grew faster. Relatively small percent of the market, less than 3% of the market, but both for the overall market and then in our fastest growing segment of probiotics, those 500 to 1,000 renminbi products outgrew the market over 70%, more than 3 times the overall category growth rate. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of the size, the growth rate, the platform performance, the manufacturer performance, the segment performance, and then finally how different price points perform in the overall market. So hopefully that helped you understand the market. This is a big market, again, well over $10 billion US. There's plenty of opportunity. It's growing. It's competitive, but for those that are in the market, there are certainly continued opportunities, as you can see here, with changing mix of products and platforms, not to mention price points. For those you considering getting in, there are certainly opportunities, both with the established platforms, they're very healthy, and they are growing, as well as some of the smaller platforms who, at least in this year, actually outperformed and outgrew the larger platforms. Just a few words about early data. So we are a Shanghai-based digital data collection company. We have 3 main areas of business that we cover on. One is e-commerce, which is I just covered. We track sales and market share in a number of categories, well over 80 categories that we track. I just showed you a few in this presentation, but we track many, many more on a monthly basis, and we produce those numbers. We also do a lot of pricing work on e-commerce. Completely different area. We cover menus. We cover menu insights. We track those sales and we report on what's happening on some of the menus. And we also cover a lot of pharmaceutical sites. That's kind of a specialized area, but we do a lot of work in the pharmaceutical area, reporting on trends in product patents, things like that in the pharmaceutical area. Okay. We are a key strategic partner of Minto, which is, if you haven't heard of Minto, they are a large multinational with UK headquarters, operate in a number of countries in the world. They do a lot of new product development. And we partner with them on a lot of things in terms of client pitches, product development, joint projects, things of that nature. So us combined with them, we feel is a powerful combination. Okay. The product that I just showed you is a product we call category modeling. So again, we track about 80 FMCG categories. We produce data monthly. There's an online tool. We also customize in terms of our delivery, in terms of PowerPoint, in terms of APIs. There's a lot of ways that we deliver data. So of course, we're happy to discuss this further with anyone that may have an interest. Here are my contact details. So first and foremost, thank you. I appreciate your attendance and listening to me. If you'd like to find out more, I'd be more than happy to speak with you. So this is my contact information. That's my email, brian@earlydata.com. And that's my phone number there. So if you're at all interested and would like to find out more, I'd be happy to share more data with you as well. Please contact me. So thank you very much. I appreciate your attendance and listening. And Jeff, thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you for tuning in to HPA Global Insights. Please like, subscribe, and share with your colleagues. Any questions or suggestions, email us at info@uschinahpa.org. This channel is operated by US China Health Products Association, which is a nonprofit organization. Please consider joining the association and supporting its global endeavors. Your support is very much appreciated. Until next time, take care.